Hello, everyone. I'm Winter Mullenix, Narrative Director for Cryptic Studios. With me today, I've got the incredible R.A. Salvatore and Geno Salvatore, as well as Randy Mosiondz, our Creative Director. So today we're going to be asking some questions about Northdark Reaches. First and foremost, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Of course. It's fun to be here again after several years.
Well, gentlemen, what's your involvement with Neverwinter's new module, Northdark Reaches, and what's coming with the next module?
I'm doing the new series, The Way of the Drow, which is a trilogy, kind of completing the circle of the Legend of Driss almost. And when you guys over at Cryptic reached out to me and said, we want to do more modules, it's perfect time because it just fits right in with the books that I'm doing because there's so much going on, particularly in the Dark Elf City. So Geno and I came on to help create the story with you guys for Northdark, and it's been a lot of fun.
It's been an amazing experience on our end because we loved reading the material that you provided.
Yeah, and you saw it before the readers saw
it. We did. Yeah. And we kind of started weaving a story together, like what we thought could go in between these stories, and we presented that to you. And just seeing like where your mind was going and what you wanted to portray between the books was fascinating. And it was a fantastic collaboration. How about you, Geno?
Well, my involvement has been going between because my father is a very busy person writing books as well. And this does involve quite a lot of additional writing and details. So I've been primarily functioning to help bridge the gap between story and game story, so to speak.
There is a gap there. There has to be to make both work. Novels and games do different things.
Yep. It's an interesting gap. It's an interesting constraint to have to work where you're trying to tell certain pieces of a story that need to fit alongside novels, but you're constrained by the rules of the game world. And that's fun to work in, actually.
So can you tell us a little bit about the two-part storyline you helped create for Northdark Reaches and the next module?
Yeah, well, when I'm doing the 3 books, they're working in 2 different places. One involves the companions of the Hall and Driss up at the surface, the continuation of the story that's been going on. And the other one, the one that's involved with Northdark Reaches, has to do with the budding civil war that's happening in Menzoberranzan, the Dark Elf City. So that's like hinted at in the first 2 books. There's sections devoted to it, but it's just still building. All the suspense is building. The houses are kind of lining up on one side. Either they're with Loth or they're against Loth. And this has been going on since the last Driss trilogy when the main house created this big heresy. And so the city's in turmoil. And there's obviously something really big, bad coming. And, I want to point out that it's certainly going to be different in the book than the players are going to experience. There are some things that are the same, like what's the goal? But players are going to write their own story. But it's fun to explore a lot of these little side stories, especially in the different format, like Geno was saying, of a game.
That does lead to our next question, actually. So what led you and the Cryptic team to decide and make the storyline portray events in between the first 2 books in your latest trilogy series, Way of the Drow? Is it because there were more stories to tell within the Way of the Drow universe?
Partly. And the other reason is just timing. I mean, you couldn't tell some of the stories that are in the books if I hadn't written them yet because I don't know what I'm going to put in the books half the time until I get there. So these books always take twists and turns when I'm going. And if I had you say, well, here's what's going to happen. You have to have the characters go and do X, Y, and Z. And then in the books, they get to X and then they go back the other way to W and V or whatever instead of Y and Z. Then, wait a minute, this isn't how it happened in the books, but it won't be. It can't be exactly the same. You don't want it to be because it could take too much suspense away. And again, it just plays in a different type of format. These are new heroes. The people playing the game, their characters aren't in my books. They're telling their own stories. And then the other reason, again, was just because, we started doing this when I was writing, probably right when I started writing Glacier's Edge. And I had no idea what was going to happen as I go through the whole book. I'm a complete pantser. I'm not a plotter. I come up with a plot and then I start writing and the characters go, no, that's not what happened. Let us tell you what happened. So It's practical, and it's also, I think, more fun this way. And,
Awesome.
and the end result that we hope for, all of us, is that if you've read the books and you play the game, a lot of things will make more sense to you, or be clearer, like what's at stake. And if you played the game and then you go to read the books will show you some of the things you saw in the game from a different perspective of the characters in the books.
Always fun to get that. Oh, hey, I know that guy. That's when you're playing a game, right? Hey, I recognize that person.
Yeah, and then one of the best parts about doing something like this is the ability to stick little Easter eggs in and see who catches them.
Right.
That was one of the most exciting things for me, working with the two of you. Even though I've known you folks forever, like this is the first time I actually got to work with you. And so it was nice to see these characters come to life in a different way. Randy, I think you might have some insight on this. Why did we choose to go in between the books from a design perspective as well?
Well, I think part of it is just good timing, right? When we decided to go back to the Underdark and we reached out to the Salvatores about this, it happened to line up with the Way of the Drow trilogy, and when we talked about splitting it up into two types of modules, it actually lined up pretty well between them. So that just seemed like a natural fit and a natural sense of direction for the gameplay we were doing.
So as for the next question, what is your favorite part of the storyline in Northdark Reaches?
My favorite part of Northdark Reaches was the villains. I really enjoy writing villains in general because I'm such a fantastic, righteous, upstanding citizen that writing people who aren't is a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No
He likes
sarcasm at all.
writing villains because it gives him ideas of how to kill us in his D&D game on Sunday night.
That's also not false. I really enjoyed the villains in Northdark Reaches, and I also really enjoy the villains in the one that's coming next. They might be a little bit more recognizable, but both groups of bad guys have some history, and it's fun to explore. I also really enjoyed in Northdark Reaches, I really enjoyed Rump It Up as well. As a character, he was a lot of fun to engage with. There is something delightfully gross about the way Mike and Ids communicate that is really fun to play with, and hope the players are getting a little bit, okay, that's great, but ew.
It's better than spider webs.
Yes.
That's what you get going through Mental Burns. My favorite part of Northdark Reaches was that I was done with the first book before all of this hit. It got me thinking in different ways about the storyline that was really secondary in the first two books. That's when I realized that Braylon was going to be such a big player in this story as one of the NPCs as we went forward with this. But the thing I really liked was the setup, again, before you get into where we are in the books, the mood we had to set in that trail down to Menzo Baranzan. Because I couldn't just have, especially with, you'll understand better when you read Loth's Warrior, the number of groups that are going down there in different ways. I can't just have them all in Menzo Baranzan. It's getting there is part of the fun. And of course, the Northdark Reaches really showed a lot of that, right? It really showed the areas before you get to the city. And other areas were created just for that. But now they get a reference point in the books or in the last book, or, they make sense in the last book, which makes it more fun for me because I was able to incorporate my creative process on these other projects. It kind of all blended together. We're going to a place in Menzo Baranzan that I've only barely touched upon. I think this came from you, Winter, actually, the idea of going to a place that got destroyed in a really weird way and thrown somewhere. And I don't want to give anything away, but the idea of going and exploring that ruin, if you will, really appeals to me, and may become a dungeon someday that I'll kill my D&D characters with.
Yeah.
I thought it was very cool. So all of that whole storyline that came out of you and then Geno and bringing most of that to me, that I was able to then dig into was my favorite part.
That has been one of my favorite things about collaborating with the two of you. It wasn't like prescriptive. We explored things together and then we just kind of saw where it went.
Yeah.
And it was very organic.
Yes.
I love that. Randy, do you have a favorite part of Northdark Reaches?
Visually, I think one of my favorite places is actually the Lake of the Carrion King. I think the environment team did a great job at bringing those elements to life. The sporing tunnels are also great. Speaking of myconids and their habits, ways of communicating, and everything, because that is a focal point for the myconids, who are allies, friends in the situation, and that's almost like a sacred place to them. It is a place where they commune and like share stories, and that's also visually they did a fantastic job for that. So I guess I'm pro myconid. Right?
I love the myconids. I think my favorite part of the story, though, was that we got to go between your two books, but then we got to look at other source material as well, that you've been a large inspiration for, like Out of the Abyss. And we pulled characters like Rumpadump and other characters that won't be named to not spoil the surprise, but we got to really pull those in and make it a cohesive part of the Underdark ecosystem. And it was, to me, just a dream come true, honestly. I love the whole setting. So your fans love your characters, Bob. Are there any fan favorites that players can expect to meet in Northdark Reaches? Drizzt, perhaps?
Yeah, I would think there are. There's a guy who wears an eye patch that shows up as we go along, and Drizzt is there, and let's not give too much away. Yeah. And the guy I really hope will become a fan favorite is Braylon. Because he's become my favorite.
Yeah, and he's a real focal point for the Northdark Reaches, so it's great.
How about you, Geno? Are there fan favorites that you want to call out or point out? Or
I agree, Braylon is very cool. I think Rumpadump is fantastic. Sarabelle and Minolan Faye, who are both favorites of mine. So I don't know if they're fan favorites, but I'm really happy to have both of them involved in Northdark Reaches.
What do you like most about writing with video games in mind?
Well, one of my favorite parts of writing books is world building. In the book, you're walking down the road looking through the eyes of my characters. You're living vicariously through the characters I'm giving you in the book, if you will. But I like to make the world around them fairly complete. So my job becomes creating the environment and the quest and the journey for your character and really focusing on that. That's some of my favorite parts of writing these books, is creating the world.
I am a fan of working with constraints. I like writing graphic novels. I like writing for other media besides just books. And I really like writing for video games because the constraints are so specific. It has to be able to work within the systems of the game. It has to be able to work with the budget for the game, the art budget. The more things you want to throw into a game, the more time it takes, the more artists it takes. So you have restrictions on what you can do. Taking those restrictions and taking a story, an idea, a concept, and running it through those restrictions and coming out with something good on the other end, to me is fascinating exercise. Distilling it through the rules that you have to follow to turn that into a game and ending up with quality product on the other end of it. That's my favorite part of it. And then the second thing is, I agree, the fact that the main character is the player creates a really interesting dynamic for the story, where the story has to function around the player and also through the player without ever feeling like you're forcing the player to do something. And that also is an interesting and sometimes challenging constraint that, again, I enjoy very much building through.
See, that's why I need them on these projects, because on the first part, I'm exactly the opposite, right? I want to just run wild. And when I'm writing in the Realms these 35 years, but the biggest job I have before I write the book is find a place where nobody else is, so I can just go crazy. So you guys would probably hate me if I didn't have the guardrail known as Geno.
Yeah, I've never really been able to operate with the go somewhere else style, but then again, that's never been an opportunity presented to me, so it works out.
How about you, Randy? What's your favorite part of writing for games?
Well, it's always interesting writing for games, especially when Bob talks about the world building aspects, and I really enjoy world building myself. We've got but of course for video games, especially action focused video games, there's a lot of world building you need to do as part of visual storytelling, right? Where you're setting up the environments that the characters exist in, the ambient behaviors that's happening, because all of that tells a part of the story as well, right? Like, and you're writing a book, of course, you're focused on painting a picture for the reader, and with the video games, that's a aspect of what you're doing, but people aren't necessarily there to read stuff. They want to hear the voice of the character, which is audio aspects, is of course a big part of that. Casting the right characters, getting the right nuances of the voice and manner across. All about that, Winter, and also just kind of setting the environment, setting the stage for that the players are going to be experiencing this environment in. Bringing those parts all together, I think, is like what I find joy in, right? Is setting the stage in which you have the gameplay and the storytelling aspects all together.
I would say my favorite part falls in line with a lot of what the three of you said. I love the world building aspect, but for me, I tend to lean into the speculative side of things. Like, what does this say about me through this character? What does this say about somebody else through this character? What is this character exploring for people? Mm-hmm. I like sort of going into that deeper psychological element in my head. I get a little too into it when I'm writing, and I just get really deep and involved in all of that. And so I love seeing how everybody's different approach comes together to create a collaborative whole that's just so unique for the player experience. What excited you most about collaborating again with Cryptic for story content in Neverwinter?
Well, the first time went really well. I had a lot of fun. It was my other son Brian was actually working on that one with me, and we had a lot of fun with that, especially because I got to do so much with Thibbledorf Punt. And some of the designs you guys came up with for Punt, and so when I saw him in the game, I almost fell out of my chair laughing because it was just perfect. And that, to me, is what this whole thing is about. It's what this whole career of mine is. Why it's a hobby and a job all at once, because of the community, because of the fact that it's bigger than just the things I'm working on. So being able to go and work with you guys, being able to go work in other areas and still do this, and seeing other people bringing things like the upcoming campaign pieces that you created, that kind of is like inspiring me back. And someday I may go there in the book.
I love that. I absolutely love hearing that. That's one of my favorite parts of collaborating with you folks. It's just, it's, as I said, organic and just like this natural flow of ideas. Was the process or experience different from the original collaboration for the 8th module? It
was, because when we did it the first time, I think it was much more structured in terms of, because I think the timing was a lot tighter up front. Brian had been doing exactly this type of thing at 38 Studios before, when they kind of went away. And so he knew exactly what we needed to put in there. So my input, I think, on a creative level was more upfront, but then I kind of stepped back from it. Whereas with this one, Geno and I playing back and forth a lot more as we go along.
Randy, do you have anything to add to that? Like, was the process or experience different from the original collaboration of the 8th module?
When we were doing the 8th module for Neverwinter, it was one of the first times we really did a collaboration like this. So we were trying to figure out what's the best way to communicate all the elements of our game to an outside person who would be writing a lot of the story elements. So one of the things we try to portray is okay, this is how our quest structures work. This is how everything is linked together, et cetera, because we have to assume that whoever we were giving this information to didn't really necessarily know a lot of the mechanical elements of the game, right? So wanted to do our best to say, hey, here are the boxes to work within in terms of communicating something that we can turn into a story. One of the things that worked well in that sense was the story we told with their first Underdark module was very structured. Like we had a bunch of instance missions where like you and your team would go into, as opposed to a shared environment, because once you have like a shared static space, you have less specific implementations you can do because you're in a shared space with other people. So you can't have people running in and out and everything. But with missions, you can do a bit more storytelling, more structured storytelling, where certain things happen and cutscenes happen, where characters come in and come out, etc. So I think most of that was instance, so we were able to do a little bit more of the structured storytelling in that sense. And with the newer releases we're doing, it's a bit of mix of both. Like we have a lot of storytelling that's happening within the zone, and then we have a few instances that are for focal points.
In addition to that, we now have somebody helping the Neverwinter team who is more familiar with the publisher side of things as well. So basically, I was able to look at the process and say, video games and publishing and everything else works a bit differently. Let's refine this a bit and make sure that we're servicing both sides equally. And Randy and I worked together with the design team and you folks to really pull that process together and refine it for the next module. So who knows if there's ever another collaboration again in the future, it'll be smoother than ever.
The other thing is, I think you guys are way more tuned into the realms. I mean, how many years now? You guys know the realms better than I know the realms, I think.
We're coming up on our 10th anniversary next year for Neverwinter.
And a lot of the realms now are probably inspired by things that you've been doing over 10 years. So the back and forth, it's like you're more at home there now as well, I think.
Yeah, it was really interesting working with Neverwinter over the last decade plus of time. There's a lot of places there that we actually took from modules from places that were established in the realms, but we also introduced a lot of original stuff too, which is then you see in the new rule books. It's like, hey, that's the stuff that we did. That's great, kind of cool, and it's interesting to have that kind of collaboration back and forth and everything, and developing this world together is fantastic. There's elements from Neverwinter game that has made their way into some tabletop games, and we have people talking to you about, hey, we met Dritz in a tabletop game. We have people that talk about taking elements that have introduced in our game into their tabletop games as well. So it's nice seeing that kind of flow of creativity keep on going.
You just reminded me of something. One of the things that really made me want to jump in those 8 years ago or whatever it was.
Yep.
One of the things that really made me want to jump in is you guys find, because of when we had that meeting at Wizards, basically they said to me, are you going to be working on anywhere near the Sword Coast in your next book? And the next book was going to be Gauntlgrim at that time. Mm-hmm. And I said, yeah, actually I am. And they said, think you can blow up a city for us? Right? Because they want all new, right? Because you guys were taking over Neverwinter, so it's going to be all new assets, and so they wanted the city flattened. So I got to blow up Gauntlgrim. If you work in a shared world and you love blowing up cities, you know how frustrated you get as the years go by and they won't let you. And here you guys come along and say, "Will you blow up a city for me?" I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah.
Just push on the TNT bar, just boom. What appeals to you about the Underdark, and were you excited to revisit it in a video game medium?
For me, it's not really revisiting; it's visiting. I've never really worked strongly in the Underdark before this at all. The Underdark is if not entirely unique, it is a very rarely explored space in video games. The whole idea, or rather in fantasy fiction, underground worlds are interesting inherently, and the Underdark is one of the older, fully fleshed out, massive spaces under a world that has its own ecosystem, has its own setup. So it's just not the sort of space that I get to work in often, and I'm very happy about that. Previously, I've worked on the surface world in Forgotten Realms a few times, and I love the realms, but I was definitely excited to get to delve under the surface for a little while.
And how about you, Bob? What appeals to you about the Underdark, and were you excited to revisit it in a video game medium?
What have I not been visiting? Yeah, what appeals to me about it? Well, I think one of the central places in there is a place called Mosiondz that I know a little about and kind of created. What I really love about visiting in the video game now is I really love that we're finally starting to do some visuals of it, more than just a static book cover, if you will. This started also with that little drow lullaby poem that I wrote for Sleep Sound, when you start to see the Underdark differently. And remember, when I started writing in the Underdark, it was a lightless place, and they had infravision, and the time clock of Mosiondz heated up. It didn't glow. It just got hot, and the heat told them what time it was by how high the heat had risen up the pillar. So it was very different. And I always figured back then, if they were ever going to make like an Underdark Dritz movie, they could just do a black screen and have people talking and hitting swords together behind the scenes. But now seeing how we're re-exploring that space and trying to give it visual beauty as well, and beauty and horror, right? It's becoming way more interesting to me. It's like when you pull up a story about some cave they discovered, and you go in Mexico or somewhere. There was one I saw that they had discovered in Mexico, and when they went down there, they found these giant crystals, and they find the colors and the you put the light on. It's like when you go in the ocean and you put the light on the fish and the coral reefs and stuff, and all this explosion of colors, or you put the Hubble telescope or the new telescope and you point them out at the universe, and you see this explosion of colors where there was just black. And that's how I feel about the Underdark right now. It's like I'm seeing it coming back at me in images that aren't just on the cover of a book. And that's really exciting for me.
That has to feel awesome. Randy, what appeals to you about the Underdark? Were you excited to revisit it?
Yeah. The Underdark is, I think, a great place. There's so much to it. We're just taking one aspect of it, like Northdark Reaches, and previously we touched on Mantle Dareth and some places around that. But the area is huge. It's pretty much a underworld that exists across most of Faerun. And Faerun is pretty big, but just thinking that there's like this whole multiple civilizations that are underneath the world as well is just like a great aspect to it. And I think maybe some of the first impressions people get is like Underdark, oh, it's just caves, you're going to caves, and like, yes, but there's just so much that you can explore in terms of how many of the Underdark races that have built whole civilizations there, not just the Drow, but the Dwargar, the Myconids, etc. Each of them have their own kind of expression about what their life and culture is like. And bringing those things to life, it gets into exploring different cultures, different worlds, ways people live is different than the overworld. And kind of like, well, this is the way it works above ground, but what is the situation? Like you mentioned the Narbondel, right? It was just originally heats up and cools down and everything. And that's changed a bit where it is more of a light and dark progression as well. And that changes certain aspects of the way it's visually presented. Always excited when we can go to the Underdark and flesh out new areas to explore, because there's a lot there and we barely touch the undersurface.
Yeah, and there's commerce. One of the things when I'm writing the books, one of the first things I try to figure out as I figure out the society is the geography. Because what type of land you live in is going to determine an awful lot about how you live. Mm-hmm. If you live in a land of plenty that's like near a lake full of fish, you're going to be fishermen. But if there aren't that many fish and there are other tribes, you're going to fight over them. If you're not one of the people that lives in the land of plenty, you might want to take something from them. And so this is the way our whole history evolved.
Exactly.
And it's why some nations became very good at things like war machines, while other nations didn't understand why you would bother. And now you've got this Underdark, and the possibilities are endless, right? We could find a whole new race of sentient beings that are completely different in a different place in the Underdark.
Yeah, if you take a map of the Forgotten Realms and you look at a map of the Forgotten Realms, it's very, very detailed, and you can get into very minute detail across the entirety of that landscape. And if you take a map of the Underdark, it's not. Despite the fact that it's huge, some places are defined, there are multiple civilizations, and there are lots of really cool and interesting things that have already either been detailed or that you can imagine and explore. But we don't know how deep the Underdark goes, and we don't know how big it expands. It's alien. It's a frontier. It's
the gray box of the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
It is. Remember the original gray box of the Forgotten Realms? One of the things that really drew me to the world was that you had these areas that were fairly detailed, and then you had this town here that had a little paragraph about it. Oh, Long Saddle's run by the Harpels, who are an eccentric family of wizards that live at the Ivy Mansion on a hill. That's it.
Yeah.
And then there are these other places that are just rumors, whispers, completely unknown. That's the Underdark now.
And even those who live down there are never quite comfortable traveling through there because it's so wild and so unexplored and so dangerous too. That's another element of it. You get an element of danger anytime you deal with anything Underdark related that you don't necessarily get other places in the realms. There can be plenty of challenges and dangers, and there are definitely dangerous places on the surface world, but it's not as automatic as it is if you're walking through an Underdark tunnel.
Yeah, that's why you get such organizations that spring up like the Guild of Underdark Guides. It's a thing in the realms, and if this is your first foray into Underdark, you better hire one of those so you can avoid all of the hazards that you talked about.
And think about the dangers when the path becomes too well traveled from the Underdark to the surface. Then it just makes it easier for bad things to get out.
Yep.
I also love that the Underdark, in addition to being, as you mentioned, the gray box, it's a literal parallel. It's a literal and a figurative parallel where you can explore that more speculative aspect, like what would people do in this circumstance? How can we really know? We don't live in that circumstance, but let's find out. And I think that's a really beautiful element of it that really appeals to me. And that's something that I love exploring in the video game medium. We hope you'll join us in Northdark Reaches this November 8th on Neverwinter on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. Thank you so much, R.A. Salvatore and Geno Salvatore, for joining us. We really, really, really enjoyed working with you, and we look forward to our continued collaboration on the next module. Can't wait to see you guys in game.